as we have done two other things just the last few hours. So if there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that following the statements of Senator Menendez, Durbin, Murray, Schumer, that the Senate...
Would the leader yield just for a question?
Sure.
I just asked the leader, the government's shut down and there is nothing we can do to keep it open, that the only way to keep the government open would be for the House to pass the resolution that we've already sent them. Is that correct?
That's right. It keeps the government funded, and they've had that for days now. They could do it with the way they vote in a matter of 10 minutes.
Right, but nothing we can do with this resolution that they intend to send us until...
They're over there now negotiating with themselves, I guess.
Yeah, because isn't it true, Leader, that until they vote for that resolution, the government will remain shut?
That is absolutely...
They can send us 100 different little doodads, gizmos, and other kinds of things, but the ball is in their court, and we hope and wish that they would, is our wish, isn't that true, sir, that they pass our resolution, and that would keep the government open.
It's in their court and has been in their court.
Thank you, Leader.
Is there objection to the unanimous consent request? Hearing no objection, without objection, so ordered.
Madam President.
The Senator from New Jersey.
Madam President, I had hoped we wouldn't get to this point, and I believe that where I was headed is to embody why we've come to this moment today, and it just didn't happen. As I was referring to this article by Jonathan Shade of New York Magazine, that in January, the House Republicans met, retreated to Williamsburg, Virginia, and came up with a strategy. What's that strategy? He goes on to say, the first element of that strategy is a kind of legislative strike. House Republicans initially decided to boycott all direct negotiations with President Obama, and then subsequently extended that boycott to negotiations with the Democratic Senate, which only goes to prove why, despite having passed a budget 6 months ago, or over 6 months ago, that each of the 18 times that Senator Murray, the budget chair, has asked to go to a conference, which is a meeting of the House of Representatives and the Senate to work out their differences in their budgets, there has been objections. So when I read this article and say that House Republicans decided to boycott all direct negotiations with President Obama, and then subsequently extended that boycott to negotiations with the Democratic Senate, we are seeing the consequences of that strategy here today. And this kind of refusal, he says in his article, to even enter negotiations is highly unusual. And the way to make sense of it is that Republicans have planned since January to force Obama to accede to large chunks of the Republican agenda without Republicans having to offer any policy concessions of their own. It's pretty interesting. And you know, Madam President, for those who have said, well, both sides, the reality is there is no moral equivalency to shutting down the government. If you are willing to use the tool of shutting down the government in order to elicit what you could not achieve by winning at the ballot box, i.e. getting a Republican president elected, both houses of the Congress, then you could ultimately repeal a law that you disagreed with. But since you couldn't do it that way, to have a policy that ultimately says, no, we're willing to shut down the government in order to achieve what we could not do at the ballot box with the will of the American people, there is no moral equivalency. So it cannot be accepted that both sides are to blame when clearly only one side is willing to pursue their political goals by closing down the government and the consequences that flow from that. So it's an interesting article, and I ask unanimous consent that the article be included in the record so that all of my colleagues will be able to read it.
Without objection.
This is a battle within the Republican Party itself about where they're headed, and it is a battle that is totally unnecessary because I think there's a simple message to the Speaker. Allow the House of Representatives to have an up or down vote on what the Senate has sent it, which is basically a clean continuation of the government without any gimmicks, without any poison pills. And if that vote were allowed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives on the floor of the House of Representatives, I believe that it would pass and the government would stay open. Instead, a few within the Republican Party who hatched this concoction in January of this year when they lost the elections and retreated to figure out what was going to be their legislative strategy are bringing the nation to its knees. And that is simply unacceptable. Now, I said at the beginning of these comments that it's not only consequential here at home, and it will be consequential to many families, to those who are federal employees and their families, to those who seek the assistance of the federal government, whether that's a small business loan, whether it's somebody for the first time enrolling for Social Security payments or a veteran's disability or a whole host of other things that will not be able to do it if the government is obviously going to be shut down as of tomorrow. But it's also a consequence in the world, and I say that as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. What message do we send to the world when, in fact, we cannot get our own budget done, and that one party is willing to hold the nation hostage in order to get their political views pursued? We're trying to convince Iran not to pursue nuclear weapons, and we tell Iran, if you disarm totally and you stop your nuclear weapons program, then sanctions can be lifted to you. I got to believe the Iranians are looking and saying, is it possible that such an agreement could ever be delivered by the Congress of the United States? If we totally disarm, if we end all of our nuclear weapons program, if we do everything that the Security Council has asked us, would the United States lift the series of sanctions that they have ultimately passed upon us? This Congress cannot agree with the President. And when I say this Congress, the Republican Congress and the House of Representatives. So it's a dangerous message in the world. We tell other nations that we believe they have to have certain disciplines, and yet we cannot ultimately keep our own budget open and the nation and its government functioning. I think this is the ultimate extortion. And I believe that since this is by design, not by chance, that it is going to have real consequences for our nation. You know, there's no doubt that if there is a prolonged shutdown, it will be consequential to our economy. It will be consequential to the gross domestic product. We saw that 17 years ago. It will be consequential to not only Wall Street, but to Main Street in terms of their confidence as how to move forward. This economy is in recovery. The last thing it needs is a body blow by its own government as it tries to continue to grow an economy in which more people can be employed. The consequences of Republicans doing this is more than a government shutdown. It's increasingly an economic shutdown. And that is simply something that we should not accept. Finally, to send us a resolution after 6 months of trying to go to a conference, 18 different petitions and motions on this floor to go to a conference, to go to that simple meeting that might have reconciled these differences that were objected by certain Republicans within this chamber, and now say you're going to send us a motion to go to conference when you have shut down the government and therefore have a gun at our head in order to be able to try to negotiate the critical issues that might be negotiated is simply unacceptable. They already have a legislative victory. We have accepted an amount in the temporary budget that is less than what we devised in the Senate budget, $80 billion less, and yet that is not satisfactory to them. So this is not about the economics. This is about their drive to kill the Affordable Care Act in a way that undermines the health and quality of opportunity for millions of Americans who finally don't have to worry about pre-existing conditions, don't have to worry about lifetime caps, can keep their children on their insurance to the age of 26, can get millions of dollars across the landscape of the country for seniors to reduce prescription drug costs, and that finally controls costs in this nation. Their fear is not that it won't work. Their fear is that it will succeed, and in doing so will undermine the very essence of what they've been against all along. That is a horrid way to pursue a political tactic at the consequence of the nation's loss, and that is what is going on here today. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The senator from New York.
Thank you, Madam President. And we are, as has been said by Leader Reid and my good friend from New Jersey, at an unfortunate moment. There are millions of people who are innocent, who just wake up in the morning, work hard, get a paycheck, and help feed, clothe their families, who will not be getting that paycheck tomorrow morning. They might be federal government workers. And, you know, I've heard some of my colleagues on the other side sort of demonize the federal government. When I think of the federal government, I think of individual people who are working, who show up at work in the rain and the snow, who work hard, like people in the private sector, or like people who work for state governments, or like the people who work for us. Why should they be punished? And then there are so many others. The veteran who needs a change in his or her disability formula can't get it. The construction worker who's working on a federally funded highway, or somebody who works in a defense plant as a civilian. All these people have now been put at real risk. And there's an answer, as I mentioned in my colloquy with the leader. The answer is for the House to pass the bill that passed here. The key vote had a majority of Democrats and Republicans, 25 Republicans, and keep the government running. Now, they're busy working late at night on another little subterfuge, little scheme. Keep the government, have a conference. Well, as the leader said, conferences are fine with us. We tried to do a budget conference 18 times. But don't do a conference as a charade while you're shutting the government down. That's what the other side is asking us to do. So let's modify what they're doing. Let them pass the bill that's now in the House that will keep the government running till November 15th, and then we'll have a conference on how to fund the government for another year. Make no mistake about it. Tomorrow morning, their next gambit will be defeated here in the House, here in the Senate. And then we'll be back where we are now, that there is a bill, a ready bill, in the House of Representatives that can keep the government funded and prevent these millions of innocent people and our national economy from being hurt, and hurt significantly. So a final plea at 12:15, 15 minutes after the government has been officially closed. House members, Speaker Boehner, let the bill come up for a vote. It'll pass. It'll save such trouble and even worse for millions of innocent Americans. It will save our economy from great risk. And then we can go back to debating the many issues that you and we want to debate. So with that, Madam President, with a bit of a heavy heart, because this didn't have to happen, and to have a small group of people who are so sure that they are so right that they can hurt millions to pursue that righteousness, or self-thought righteousness, it's a bad thing. And I hope it doesn't happen again. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m.
Two times today, the Senate voted to send a clean funding resolution back to the House without any language about the health care law. To do that this evening, the Senate removed a measure to delay the individual health insurance mandate for a year. That measure is making a reappearance on the House floor tonight. The House Republican leadership is also moving to appoint formal negotiators to a House-Senate conference to try to hash out an agreement on a government funding bill. But on the floor, Senate Majority Leader Reid challenged the House to pass the Senate's Clean CR first, and then negotiators can sit down and talk about going forward. Current government funding expired 19 minutes ago, so the federal government is now in a partial shutdown. The Senate will be back in the morning at 9:30 Eastern, live here on C-SPAN 2. And our live coverage of the House continues tonight on C-SPAN. On tomorrow